The prairie wind cut sharp through the open plains, howling like a wounded animal. Dust swirled in spirals, chasing shadows across the horizon, and somewhere between nowhere and hell, a girl was tied to a fence post. Her name was Alira Vance, though few folks ever spoke it with kindness. Blood matted her long, dark hair where a gash had opened on her scalp. Her wrists were raw, torn from struggling against the coarse hemp rope that bound her to the old, splintered post. Flies buzzed around her, drawn by the copper scent of blood and the promise of stillness. She'd stopped screaming hours ago. There was no one to hear her. No one but the prairie hawks circling above. The sun was dipping low, bleeding orange into the sky. Every part of her ached, from the bruises on her ribs to the cracked skin of her lips. Her horse was gone, her pistol, too. The only thing left was her stubborn will, that bitter ember inside her that refused to go out. Even as the cold came crawling in behind the dusk. She hadn't always lived on the edge of survival. Once, she'd been the daughter of a lawman in a quiet town named Black Hollow, where the streets were lined with clean storefronts and folks said good morning like they meant it. But that life had burned to ash 3 years ago when Calder Boone and his gang rode in with pistols drawn and smiles like knives. Her father had died defending the town, and Alira had been left with nothing but his badge, and a thirst for justice that soured into vengeance. She'd hunted Boone for months, through deserts and dead ends, whispering his name to bartenders and bounty hunters alike. And when she finally found him, she'd been so sure, so ready. But Boone was smarter than she expected. He'd turned the tables in the hills outside Duro Gulch, ambushing her just as she thought she had him cornered. His men beat her, tied her up like a dog, and laughed as they rode off. "You wanted to find me," Boone had sneered, tipping his hat. "Well, now you have. This is where the trail ends, sweetheart." But Alira wasn't dead yet. As the last of the sun slipped below the hills, a shadow detached from the rising dark. She didn't hear him approach, didn't even realize he was there until she saw the glint of a knife. Panic surged. Was Boone back to finish the job? Or maybe coyotes had learned to walk like men. But then the rope around her wrists gave way. Sliced clean, Alira fell forward, gasping, too weak to move. A gloved hand steadied her. She looked up into a face half hidden beneath a dusty hat and a black neckerchief. Eyes like flint, cold and unreadable, met hers. "Can you walk?" the stranger asked, voice low, almost reluctant. She tried to answer, but her throat was too dry. Instead, she nodded, teeth clenched against the pain. Without another word, the man helped her to her feet, moving with silent purpose. He offered her a canteen. She drank greedily, choking on the first few gulps, then looked back, toward the post. The rope dangled from it like a dead snake, and her blood still stained the ground below. Double quotes, "Why ... Why'd you help me?" she managed to ask. The stranger's jaw tensed. "Wasn't gonna leave you to the buzzards?" That was all he said. He led her to a small, dark horse waiting beyond the ridge. It stood quiet and still, as if trained for stealth. The man helped her into the saddle and mounted behind her, careful not to jar her wounds. As they rode into the gathering night, Alira didn't know his name, didn't know where they were headed, or why he'd chosen to save her. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Alira's head lolled as the horse carried her through the night, every step jarring her battered ribs. The stranger behind her said nothing, guiding the animal with a steady hand and an uncanny quiet. The silence stretched, broken only by the steady clop of hooves and the occasional screech of a nighthawk. They rode west, away from the post and into the black desert where the stars were sharp and bright like shattered glass. Alira tried to stay awake, to piece together what had happened, who this man was, and where he was taking her, but her body, bruised and broken, was begging for rest. Eventually, the darkness gave way to a dim glow on the horizon, a small campfire flickering low in a shallow ravine. The stranger dismounted first and caught her as she nearly tumbled from the saddle. "Easy," he murmured, guiding her down. "You'll rest here." She leaned against a stone outcropping as he dug through his saddlebags and brought out a rolled blanket, which he laid across the ground for her. He worked with minimal movement, efficient and practiced. She watched through half-lidded eyes as he added wood to the fire, the flames dancing across his silhouette. Now, in the light, she could see him more clearly. His coat was worn leather, patched in places, and his boots had seen many miles. His face was angular, his mouth grim. He moved like a man who knew how to kill and didn't take pleasure in it. A long scar ran from just under his left eye to his jawline, an old wound, but deep. He kept his hat low, and though the neckerchief had come down, he hadn't said a word more than necessary. "You gonna tell me your name?" Alira rasped, reaching for the canteen he'd placed near her. He paused a moment, as if debating whether it was worth the trouble. Then, "Call me Rafe." She nodded. "Alira, I know." That surprised her. "How?" Rafe sat across the fire, his eyes never leaving hers. "Boone's been braggin', word is, he left the lawman's daughter tied up like a dog in the dirt, said it was a message." Alira's lip curled. "Then I hope he heard I lived." Rafe didn't smile, but something dark flickered in his eyes. Agreement. Maybe. He will. They sat in silence a while longer, the fire crackling between them. "You a bounty hunter?" she asked. "No, an outlaw." He looked at her, then, really looked, and for the first time, she saw something behind those flint-colored eyes. Something raw. He didn't answer, but he didn't deny it either. Alira swallowed hard. "So why save me?" "Because someone should have." That was all he gave her. She lay back on the blanket, too tired to press. The fire's warmth lapped at her skin, and the pain in her body dulled slightly. Boone's voice echoed in her head, that smug tone, that promise of death. She clenched her fists, nails digging into her palms. She wasn't done. She'd survive this. And when she did, she'd hunt him down and make him choke on his own arrogance. "You got a score with Boone too?" she asked, eyes half closed. "I do now," Rafe said. The fire popped, throwing sparks into the night. The next morning came harsh and dry. Rafe was already awake when Alira opened her eyes. He'd cooked something, hard bread and a strip of jerky, and was checking the horizon. "We'll move at first light," he said, handing her the food. "Where?" "To an old station house near Clearwater Ridge. Safe enough for now." Alira chewed slowly. Every bite hurt. But food meant strength, and strength meant vengeance. "You gonna help me take Boone down?" she asked, wiping her mouth. Rafe stood, adjusting his coat. "No." Her face fell. "Then what?" "I'm gonna follow you," he said. "If you're smart, you'll let me handle it. But it's your war. I'm not here to lead it." She stared at him. "You planning on disappearing?" Again after that, Rafe looked at her long and hard. "I don't disappear," he said. "I bury men." The ride to Clearwater Ridge took 2 days. Alira's strength came back slowly with each hour in the saddle, each gulp of creek water, each crust of hard bread. She felt more like herself. Bruised, yes, but alive. And that meant Boone still had something to lose? Rafe didn't talk much on the trail. He led without comment, checked the path without being asked, and moved like a man who'd spent more time tracking ghosts than living among people. Alira didn't trust him, not fully, but she didn't trust anyone anymore. And he had saved her life, which was more than anyone else had done in years. Clearwater Ridge appeared on the third morning, a cluster of crumbling buildings tucked between red bluffs and pine-covered hills, once a bustling station house during the gold rush. It was now a ghost town, half buried by wind and time, the paint long faded, roofs sagging. It looked like a place where stories came to die. Rafe guided the horse into a collapsed barn and helped Alira down. She winced but stayed standing. The swelling in her side had lessened, and she could now move without doubling over. "You sure this place is safe?" she asked. He nodded. "Nobody comes this far off the trail unless they're running." "Like you?" Rafe looked at her, unreadable. "Like both of us." They took shelter in what was left of the old bunkhouse, the only building with enough of a roof to block the sun. Rafe built a fire in the hearth, using scraps from broken furniture. Alira took a moment to explore, trailing her fingers across old walls and faded names etched into the beams. One caught her: EYEWRC 1869. "Somebody leave you a message?" Rafe asked from behind her. She shrugged. "Just looking. My father used to talk about these old towns. Said you could feel the bones of the past in the wood. Didn't know your old man." "He was a good one," Alira said quietly. "Sheriff of Black Hollow for 10 years. Never took a bribe, never drew first unless he had to." Rafe stirred the fire, saying nothing. "He died trying to keep Boone from burning the town down," she added. "And I watched Boone shoot him in the chest." Still no reply. Just the crackle of flame. Alira looked at him hard. "You ever lost someone?" Rafe's jaw tensed. "A few. You ever lose yourself?" A pause, still looking. She let the silence hang. They were two wounded dogs, circling a shared pain. She could feel it now, Not just the physical damage Boone had done, but the way Rafe carried his silence like a burden. Something in him had broken a long time ago. And maybe it never fully healed. That night, as they sat around the fire, Alira unrolled a crumpled wanted poster from her bag. Boone's smirking face stared back at them. Rafe reached for it. "You've been tracking him long." "Too long," she said. "He's got 20 men now. Not just bandits, real killers. Last I heard, they were setting up near a mining town called Hollow Creek, using the tunnels as hideouts." Rafe frowned. "That town's off limits. Corrupt marshal, rail ties, union money under the table. Boone's playing a bigger game." "I don't care about the game," Alira said. "I want him dead." Rafe studied her, then nodded slowly. "Then we need guns. Allies, someone who knows the tunnels." "You know someone." "Yeah," he said, "but he hates me." She raised a brow. "You good at making enemies?" "I'm still breathing, aren't I?" That made her smile. The first real one in days. They made a plan that night, not just revenge, but strategy. Rafe would take her to someone named Cobb Mason, a former miner turned smuggler who knew Hollow Creek like the back of his hand. Alira would rest, recover, and ready herself for what came next. Because this wasn't just a rescue anymore, it was a reckoning. The road to Hollow Creek was nothing but a cracked vein of dust winding through scorched hills and dry gulches. As Rafe and Alira rode, the land grew quieter, meaner. Even the birds stopped singing. The silence here wasn't peaceful, it was watching. Alira had cleaned herself up. Her wounds, though still tender, were healing. She'd cut her hair short with Rafe's knife, and wrapped her ribs tight beneath a second-hand shirt and borrowed coat. The revolver she wore, now an old well-oiled Colt, Rafe gave her, rode high on her hip. Like it belonged there. "How long since you saw Cobb?" she asked as they rounded a canyon bend. Rafe, as always, didn't answer right away. 2 years, maybe more. "What happened?" "I let someone die." "He didn't." That was all he said. By midday they reached the edge of Hollow Creek. From a distance, it looked like any mining town. Ramshackle buildings leaning into each other. Coal smoke curling from chimneys, a few wagons creaking down the muddy main street. But as they rode closer, Alira could feel the wrongness. Too many eyes peering from behind curtains. Too many men loitering on porches, watching. Armed. Boone had his claws in this place. They left the horses tied near an abandoned mill and entered, on foot. Rafe led them through a narrow alley, past the clatter of hammers and the low thump of distant dynamite. Alira caught glimpses of Boone's men, black coats, red bandanas, rifles on their shoulders. They weren't hiding anymore. They owned Hollow Creek now. "We're not going straight at him?" Alira asked. "Not yet," Rafe said. "First, we find Cobb." He took her to a saloon called the Rusted Flute, a place that smelled of smoke, liquor, and regret. The piano was broken, the floor sticky, and half the patrons looked like they belonged on wanted posters. Behind the bar stood a large man with a thick beard and a lazy eye and the unmistakable air of someone who'd killed more than once. Rafe approached calmly. "Looking for Cobb?" The bartender didn't even blink. "Trying to get yourself shot, Rafe?" Alira reached instinctively for her gun, but Rafe raised a hand, non-threatening. "Just talk." The bartender grunted and nodded toward the back. "Cellar, he ain't in the mood for company." They moved through a side door and descended a set of creaking stairs into a dimly lit basement filled with barrels, crates, and the strong stink of gun oil. A single lamp burned low near a table where a man sat carving a piece of wood with a short wicked knife. He didn't look up when they entered. "I told you I'd kill you if I saw you again." "Rafe," the man said evenly. "Then this must be awkward," Rafe replied. The man, Cobb Mason, finally lifted his eyes. They were pale and cold, like fog rolling over ice. He stood slowly, revealing a thick-set frame and a miner's build. The knife stayed in his hand. "You got some nerve." "I've got a job," Rafe said. "And we need your help." Cobb laughed. "We? Who the hell is this?" "Alira Vance." That caught Cobb's attention. His eyes shifted to her, narrowing. "The girl Boone left for dead." She held his stare. "The same." Cobb let the moment hang before nodding. Word traveled. That was low, even for Boone. "I'm going to kill him," she said. "But I need to get into the mines." Cobb leaned back, folding his arms. "That's suicide. He's turned those tunnels into a fortress. Maps won't help. He's got traps, lookouts, explosives. You'd need someone who's walked every shaft." "Someone like you," Rafe said. Cobb scowled. "I owe you nothing." "No," Rafe said. But you owe Boone. Cobb's jaw worked. His fingers tightened on the knife. He took Hollow Creek from men who built it. Ran out every honest miner. Left bodies in the shaft. My brother was one of them. So help us, Elira said. Let's take it back. A long silence passed. Then Cobb exhaled sharply, like he was spitting out a curse. I'll get you in, he said. But once we cross that line, there's no going back. Rafe nodded. We're not here to go back. That night, the three of them pored over a crude map in the cellar. Shafts, vents, escape routes, guard rotations. Boone's empire was built on paranoia and fear, but every wall had a crack. They would strike at dawn, for justice. Not even for revenge. For reckoning. Dawn broke cold and gray over Hollow Creek, the mist crawling low over the battered rooftops and the entrance to the mines. Elira felt the weight of the morning press down on her, like the heavy clouds above. She wasn't just walking into Boone's territory, she was walking into a trap, and she knew it. Cobb, Rafe, and she moved silently through the shadows, avoiding the main roads where Boone's men were posted. Cobb's knowledge of the tunnels was unmatched. He led them through narrow passages, their footsteps echoing softly against the jagged stone walls. The air thick with dust and the smell of rust and damp earth. The mines were a labyrinth, twisting corridors and sudden drops. Old carts left abandoned, the wooden beams creaking with age and strain. Boone had turned this place into a fortress, rigged with explosives and traps, and guarded by men with cold eyes and sharper guns. Elira's heart pounded with every step, adrenaline and fear mixing into a fierce determination. Boone had taken everything from her, her father, her peace, her home, and she was done running. They reached a junction where two tunnels intersected. Cobb stopped, pulling out a lantern and lighting it with a flick of his worn flint. The flickering light revealed scorch marks on the walls, fresh and angry. Boone's men don't mess around, Cobb whispered. There's a blast trap down, that way, one wrong step and it's over. Rafe nodded, checking his revolver. We move slow, watch each other's backs. Elira swallowed the lump in her throat and followed as they advanced. The tunnels seemed to close in. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the soft clink of their gear and the distant drip of water. Somewhere deep within, the faint murmur of voices and the clatter of tools told them Boone's men were nearby. Suddenly, Cobb stopped and held up a hand. Listen. They froze, straining their ears. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps. Enemy. Patrol, Rafe whispered. Get ready. The three pressed against the damp wall as two armed men passed, talking in low voices about the new girl and Boone's orders to keep the tunnels secure. Elira's fingers curled around her revolver. She caught Rafe's eye, no signal to shoot yet. The men moved on, disappearing into the shadows. Cobb exhaled softly. Close call. They pressed forward, every nerve alert. The deeper they went, the more traps they encountered, pressure plates, tripwires, hidden pits. Cobb expertly disarmed each, a grim smile playing on his lips. Boone thinks no one will survive this place. Not if we're here, Elira said. Hours passed in this tense dance. When they finally reached the heart of the mine, a cavernous chamber echoed with the sound of heavy boots and Boone's unmistakable laugh. Through the flickering light, Elira saw Boone, tall, brutal, with a grin that promised violence. His men stood around him, weapons ready, eyes cold and hungry. Boone's gaze landed on Elira. Well, look who crawled out of the dirt. Elira stepped forward, voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. This ends today, Boone. He laughed again. You're nothing but a bruised girl playing at justice. Rafe and Cobb flanked her, guns drawn. Boone's men surged forward. The chamber exploded into chaos. Gunfire echoed against stone. Shouts and curses filled the air. Elira moved with a fierce clarity, firing shots, dodging blows, fueled by years of pain and rage. In the midst of the fight, Boone lunged at her, their eyes locked, predator and prey, as she raised her revolver and fired. The bullet found its mark. Boone's grin faltered. He staggered back, blood blooming on his shirt. Elira stood over him, breathing hard. This is for my father. With a final, shuddering breath, Boone collapsed. The fight was over. But as the dust settled, Elira knew this victory was just the beginning. The echo of Boone's fall still hung in the damp air of the mine shaft, mixing with the heavy breaths and cautious movements of those who survived the skirmish. Elira stood over the fallen outlaw, chest heaving, fingers trembling slightly on the grip of her revolver. The years of torment, loss, and relentless pursuit had led her here to this moment of fragile triumph. Rafe knelt beside Boone's still form, searching for any sign of life, but the grimace on the man's face told the story. Boone was done, the nightmare that had haunted Black Hollow and Hollow Creek was finally over. Cobb let out a low whistle and shook his head. Didn't think you had it in you. Alira's voice was quiet but fierce. Neither did I. For a long moment, no one spoke. Outside the cavern, the first light of dawn filtered through cracks in the rock, casting long shadows across the rough floor. We need to get out, Rafe said. Boone's men aren't all dead. Alira nodded, steadying herself. Pain stabbed her side, but adrenaline kept her upright. She was far from safe. Together, they moved swiftly, navigating back through the labyrinthine tunnels, stepping carefully over the traps Cobb had disarmed. The tension was thick. The knowledge that reinforcements could be closing in relentless. As they reached the surface, the harsh light was a welcome assault on their senses. The town of Hollow Creek lay before them, scarred, broken, but still standing. Cobb spat into the dirt. Time to start fixing what Boone ruined. Alira's eyes scanned the horizon, catching the first signs of movement from Boone's remaining men. They would come. The outlaw's empire might have crumbled, but its roots ran deep. Rafe's gaze met hers. You ready for what's next? She squared her shoulders, feeling the weight of her father's legacy and her own hardened resolve. I'm just getting started. Days turned into weeks as Alira, Rafe, and Cobb worked to rebuild. They rallied the townsfolk, reclaimed the mines, and rooted out the corruption Boone had planted like poisonous seeds. It wasn't easy. The scars of fear and betrayal ran deep, but with every step forward, Alira felt the past loosen its grip. Yet in the quiet moments, when the sun dipped low and the wind whispered through the empty streets, Alira felt something else stirring, a shadow darker than revenge. Rafe's silence grew heavier, his eyes haunted, distant. One evening, as they sat by the campfire outside town, Alira finally asked, "What's really eating you?" Rafe looked into the flames, his voice low. "I'm not just running from ghosts out there, I'm running from the ones inside." Alira reached out, placing a hand on his. "You don't have to run anymore." He gave a small, bitter smile. "Maybe, but some debts aren't paid with bullets." The night grew still, and for the first time since they met, Alira felt the weight of more than just her own pain. There was a new battle ahead, one for healing, for redemption, for a future they'd both thought lost. The sun rose slowly over Hollow Creek, painting the rugged landscape with warm gold. It was a new day, not just in the sky, but in the hearts of those who had fought to reclaim what was stolen. Alira stood on the edge of town, the wind tousling her hair as she watched the miners and townsfolk return to their work. The mines hummed with life once more, the promise of honest labor, of rebuilding. But inside, a quiet storm brewed. Rafe approached, his footsteps light but sure. He carried a bundle of worn papers, maps, notes, old deeds, relics of Boone's twisted reign and the corruption buried beneath. "We've cleaned the surface," Rafe said, "but there's still work below. Not just tunnels, deals, old alliances. We have to break them, or this place will never be free." Alira took the papers, her fingers tracing the faded ink. "Then we keep fighting. Together." Rafe nodded. For the first time, there was no edge to his voice, only something close to hope. Days bled into weeks. Boone's men scattered, some captured, others driven out. The town council was reformed, led by people who had suffered but refused to bend. Alira's name became a symbol, not just of vengeance, but of justice and strength. Yet, amid the progress, the shadows of their past remained. Rafe's silence persisted. The ghosts in his eyes a reminder that some wounds cut deeper than bullets. One evening, as the sun dipped below the hills, Alira found Rafe standing alone on a ridge overlooking the town. "You don't have to carry it all," she said softly. He looked at her, the weight in his gaze heavy. "I don't know how to be anything else." She stepped closer, reaching for his hand. "Then start here, with me." For a long moment, the silence between them spoke louder than words. Then Rafe nodded, a fragile smile breaking through. Together, they turned back to Hollow Creek, a town scarred but alive, a place where endings met beginnings. Alira knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. The past was never truly gone. But with allies by her side, and the fire of justice burning bright, she was ready. This was more than survival. It was a new life forged in pain, tempered by courage, and sealed with hope. And it all began with a silent outlaw who cut her loose.